Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street, and I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be inviting Tamany Vinson Bentz to the podcast with us. Now, she works at California IP Law, and she and I have been chatting a little bit about how we need to understand trademarks and patents and so much more when it comes to the fashion industry. And a lot of you have been asking me about patents and all of these great details too. So this was just a perfect meeting where Tamany and I are now going to try to learn all about all of these things and educate you at the same time. So thanks so much for being here with me today.
Rachel, thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite things to talk about and favorite things to work in fashion on is to try to educate people on what IP means for them and their businesses. So thanks very much.
I'm going to be learning from you so much today too. And I will totally admit, now I've worked with a couple of different clients and I've worked at some big companies in the past that tried to do patents. And my knowledge of it is very limited. And I'm always kind of questioning, like, is it the right thing to do for certain brands? And we've been getting that question a lot too. So I'd love to just kind of have you jump right in and let us know specifically regarding patents. How do you know if you have an idea that should be patented, or is it just a great idea and we should just start a brand off of it?
So that's a really good question. And patents aren't always the best thing for a company. That may come as a shock to some people, but it's not always the best. And there are lots of different types of IP out there. And sometimes another one is a better fit for a company, either because it's better for their business model, or maybe it's just better for their budget. But let me talk about your question about how do you know if you should even try to get a patent? And when I work with every company, I tell them, okay, take a step back. What is it that you're doing that is unique and valuable? And by valuable, I mean like you're going to monetize it. This is very important to your brand and to your company. What is that thing? Because that's the thing that you should be thinking about getting a patent on. You shouldn't be thinking about getting a patent on just anything.
Right.
You should be thinking about getting a patent on something that's valuable to you. But the question always should be, is it really patentable? Is it really unique? And then if it is unique, there are two types of patents. There's utility patents. So are you talking about something unique that's functional? Okay. Like maybe it's a new kind of zipper nobody's ever used before. Maybe it's, this weekend I was reading about Nike's shoe that like you pop into and it has like a hinge on it and the back of the shoe pops up. Yep. Maybe you've designed something functional like that for fashion. That's exactly the type of thing it would be important to get a patent on and worth the money to spend on. Okay. Now, maybe what you did is something aesthetic that's new, but still very valuable. That you'd want to look at getting a design patent for. So design patents protect things that are the overall look of a product, but not necessarily the function of it. So to give people an example, sometimes shoe companies, if they change the width, like they come out with a platform shoe, they'll try to get a design patent on some of the aspects of that sole of the shoe in order to protect it. So that gives you a sense of like what you should be thinking when you're thinking of getting a patent. But if you're out there and you're like, look, I don't have any of those things. Good news, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a patent.
That's really fair.
You do, though, have to think about the other types of IP that you could use for your company. But That's the great thing about it.
And I really want to get there. But first, I just kind of want to continue asking a couple questions about this, because I think we've specifically been getting a lot of questions about patents in our community. And again, my very limited understanding. But my understanding is that when you do file for a patent, like let's say we've designed, I can use maybe a couple of different products that I've used at big corporate brands in the past. So when I was at Specialized, for example, we were patenting a hanging pocket from the back of a mountain liner bib short. And the way that we had to patent it was very specific to like the angles of the pocket. and the size of the pocket and how much it actually hung over the mountain bike shell. And so there were so many little details that went into the utility. So that was probably a utility patent. The utility of that had to be so specific. And we ended up running into issues where we would want to defend our patent, but someone had used like a slightly different angle or a slightly different size or something like that. And it became difficult to protect. And so if you could elaborate just a little bit more on like what needs to be included and and then I think we'll probably get to better ways of how to do something like that for fashion.
So you see that in fashion a lot because it's a crowded field. So to get a patent, you have to hone in on what's truly unique. It might have been that there were other patents on other pocket angles.
Okay.
So you had to go for a very specific one just to get the patent through.
Okay.
And I've seen that a lot. And I've seen lots of instances where companies come to me in fashion with a patent and they say, go tell these people to knock it off. I have a patent. And I look at the patent and I'm like, well, it's not really doing what you think it's doing. It's too narrow for that.
Yeah. Yep.
There isn't a great solution to that once you've gotten the patent. Once it's out, you can't really change. Once it issues, you can't really change the scope of it. And once you file it, you can't really go in and make the scope broader. Okay. So to me, it's more an issue of asking yourself the question, is the shape of the pocket so important to this category of goods that it is worth us spending the money on it? Because if it is a thing that you're like, well, somebody could just do a different size pocket or a different angle and it'll be the same to the consumer, they won't really care, it's probably not worth getting a patent on.
Okay. That's kind of where my question was going. Like, if someone can get around it really easily with a loophole, is it worth really spending your time and money?
And I think, and that's what a lot of lawyers might not say to you is that's a market question.
Yeah.
Is it easy to get around and still market a product that consumers are going to like? Because if it is, then it might not actually be worth you doing. But if it's something that you're like, no, actually, they can't easily work around this. They can't easily do it.
Yeah.
I have a client who has a patent on light up hats. And one of the unique things is where the battery pack goes in the hat, right? Sure. That was worth protecting.
Yeah.
Because if you want to light up hat, you got to put the battery somewhere. So
yeah. And there's probably only a couple places that make sense. Yeah.
Correct. So that's a good example of one where she was like, yeah, actually, this is worth it because it's not going to be that easy to design around, even though it is this specific thing. But that's not always the case.
Okay. Super interesting. Very, very informative. So you've talked a little bit about, as we've been kind of chatting back and forth, about patents, trademarks, which I'm getting into the world of myself here, even just being a small business owner, copyright, which I know a little bit about, and I'd love for you to speak on how any of those can be really relevant to the fashion industry. But you've also mentioned something called trade dress, and I have never heard of that before. So I'd love for you to, as much as you can, just kind of expand on all four of those things and help us understand the difference and how we might use them in the fashion industry.
Yeah, so let me break it down. I'll start with trademarks. Trademarks are how people identify the source of your goods. That's what it is. It could be a name, it could be a logo, could be a color. Sometimes it's a sound. But it's basically when you go out in the world, what do you want consumers to see and know it's you? Okay. What is that? And that's your trademark. And it's important in fashion to protect those because even if you don't have any other type of IP, you have a brand. If you're in fashion, you want consumers, whoever those consumers are, to identify you when they hear your name or see your logo. And you can only do that if you protect it.
Okay.
So trade dress is similar to trademarks, except it's not a name or it's not a logo.
Okay.
It could be the type of packaging you're going to use for your product. Okay. It could be in fashion, you see a lot of the big fashion houses have trade dress in the shape of something that they're doing, right? Okay. Like we can talk about, people probably heard about the Workin at the end of last year, the knockoff Birkin that Walmart was selling. What they might not know is that Hermes has registered trade dress on the shape of the Birkin, right? Like your company that you worked for could have thought about building registered trade dress in the shape of the pocket.
Okay.
Instead of a patent. So it is also what consumers are going to recognize you for,
Okay.
but it is something other than your name and your logo. The
Interesting.
catch with trade dress, though, and the reason I think people don't use it as much as they should in fashion, is you have to build it. So let's say, I'm going to keep the pocket example. Let's say the company was like, we're going to do this shape of a pocket as trade dress. Okay. When you go out in the world with a PR strategy for that product, it needs to talk about the shape of the pocket.
Okay.
But it needs to talk about the shape of the pocket in a way that's not functional. The shape is aesthetically pleasing. It's, they talk about it. It's a shape that we use in all of our things. It's reflective of, I think you said it was mountain biking. It's reflective of the mountains, something, right?
Okay.
In a non-functional way, but it needs to be part of how you build your brand with consumers. So you need to talk about it. If it's the shape of a product like a handbag, you just need to be so prevalent and consistent with that shape that consumers start to see the shape and go, that's Rachel. I see Rachel in that. That's Rachel.
Interesting. Okay.
So it can take time to build trade dress and strategy, but when you build it, it can be incredibly powerful to have.
I can see that being a really key part of like a brand identity as you're building out like your branding strategy from top to bottom. That's a really cool thing I had no idea about.
Yeah. And once you build it, you can go register it like a trademark. And then everybody, just like Hermes has the trade dress and the Birkin registered. And so you can then have something that when people do start to knock you off, you have a registration. You can go to the third-party sellers and say, look, this is mine. Things in this shape are mine. Things with this pocket are mine.
So are we seeing that for the future? Total diversion. Are we seeing that for the future of Walmart and Birkin and Hermes? Are we going to see them get into it?
I don't think so. We can get into that. That's a whole other issue. But there are laws that are protecting Walmart as a third-party seller.
Okay.
So I don't think you'll see Hermes go after Walmart. Hermes is probably dealing with a bit of a whack-a-mole on Walmart's site, I would imagine.
Interesting.
I'm not Hermes's lawyer.
Sure.
But that what I would imagine
That'd
is
be amazing.
But we could talk about that.
Birkins, yeah. Cool. Okay, great.
Then you asked about copyrights, I think. So I can quickly
copyrights. And we already talked about patents. So copyrights too.
Yeah, so copyrights protect the expression of an idea, not the idea itself. So you may decide, I'm going to make a shirt with this really unique floral pattern on it. I'm going to design the floral pattern myself. Copyright's going to protect your floral pattern for you. The important thing to recognize about copyright is that you have a copyright when you put that floral pattern on paper. It's still important to register it because you can't really enforce it unless it's registered. But certain types of IP are created just when you do it. And copyrights is one of those things.
Does that include, like, if we have clients who are writing blogs and things like that, does that include their blog posts?
Yeah, it does. It can include written works. It can include audiovisual works. I work with clients who make social media content, and we use copyrights to protect their social media content, particularly in fashion. Sometimes where you could have, you're trying to have an Instagram aesthetic for your brand, and you want that to be unique. So when consumers see it, they're like, that's Rachel. I got it. So we use copyrights to protect things like that.
Are you sick of being stuck on the sidelines of the apparel industry and you just want to be put in the game? Then join our 100% free workshop, Secrets Behind Billion-Dollar Apparel Brands, and learn the strategies, tactics, and secrets used by the most successful companies in the world. We'll cover everything from setting your brand standards to big brand line planning and executive level processes. In this workshop, you're going to learn how to name your target customer, rationalize your line, calculate product margins, roll up your revenue, and see potential profits while figuring out how to build a unique calendar for your brand. You're going to learn that and so much more. Are you ready to take your apparel business to the next level? Sign up today and use code PODCAST for a 10% discount on the full Business of Apparel online course or any of our mini courses after the workshop. Visit www.thebusinessofapparel.com/secrets to register. Don't miss out. Interesting. So cool how like all of it kind of comes together and creates like the whole big picture if you use all of it in the appropriate ways. I love that. So even for me as like a small business owner, I've been looking into trademarking some of our logos and things like that over the last couple of years. I'm going to totally admit it's not cheap and it takes a really long time. So that's one of the other big questions that we get is if I wanted to start any of these things, what are not just the costs of like hiring you, but also if I mean, not that I would ever recommend anyone do it on their own, but there are just fees that have to be paid. And so what does all of that look like? And what could someone expect in the way of timing? Because we're hearing anywhere from like 18 months to 2 years for trademarks. Is that true?
It's going to depend. So let's take trademarks. Trademarks, the process, you file them with the federal government. Mm-hmm. In 7 to 8 months, they get assigned to an attorney that works for the government that's going to review it. So for 7 to 8 months, right now, they're on a 7 to 8 month pass. You're not hearing anything. Nothing's happening. You filed it. You got to wait. Best case scenario, they pick it up in 7 to 8 months. They look at it. They don't see any issues with it. Then they publish it. Okay. And what publication means is that they make it for 30 days. Somebody who thinks that your trademark may affect them can come object to it. If nobody objects, then you'll get a notice of allowance and then your trademark will issue. So that is probably a year. Your best case scenario is a year.
Okay.
But in many cases, they won't think it's okay. They'll issue an office action. Sometimes the office action makes sense. And if you worked with a lawyer, you probably knew it was coming, right? Because the lawyer probably told you, like, there you might have this issue, but here are my arguments to overcome it. So it may not be a surprise. And in some cases, I have one right now where the office action really doesn't make sense. I think the examiner copied and pasted from another office action and just didn't edit everything out that should have come out.
Oh, interesting.
But you still have to respond to it.
Yeah.
So that builds in to the delay. And that's where you get situations where you're looking at 18 months to 2 years before you get a registration. Now, everybody should recognize, though, that you can use the trademark during that time.
Yeah.
You should use the trademark during that time. And you still have a trademark. You just don't have the federal rights to it. You have something that lawyers would call a common law trademark. It has more limited rights than a registered trademark,
my understanding
but you still
that
have it.
Okay, cool. And it's my understanding that you would use the little TM during your application process, and then you can use the circle R once it's registered. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Super interesting. And I will just throw out there too, one of the reasons that's delaying me, I was one of those terrible clients who, you know, as a small business, things evolve and change rapidly. And we had agreed that like my website was going to look like this with my logos in these places. And then over time, things changed. And so I got a phone call that said, hey, your website changed. It doesn't match our application anymore. So you caused a delay. So keep that in mind. If you're applying for trademarks, all of those things need to be kept in certain places and need to kind of match back to what you're doing. Any other big key pieces of advice on that one?
It is important that you use it consistently and that you understand that changes in it can cause problems. And also, by the way, you're going to have to renew the trademark in 5 years, and you're going to have to say that you still use it consistently. So it's important that people put the work on the front end of knowing that that's the trademark they want to use.
Yeah.
Before they actually go get the registration. And that may take some time. The other thing, touching on the cost of it, I've practiced law for over 20 years. I can tell you it's a lot less expensive to go get your registration than deal with what happens when you don't. Because when you don't is when you get the more expensive problems, like maybe a bigger brand comes in and registers your trademark. So recently, people may have heard Meghan Markle changed the brand for her company to As Ever.
Okay.
And there's actually an apparel company called As Ever, but they never registered their trademark. So there was it's not that they didn't have rights. They still have common law rights. It's just when Meghan Markle's legal team went to go figure out whether they could use the name, there was no registration on it. So that issue is more expensive to deal with than just getting the registration at the forefront.
Absolutely. That's super interesting. Can you walk us through kind of the process of starting any of these things? I'm a little bit familiar with, I mean, obviously someone should just reach out to you. So we'll talk through that too. Like, and what does that look like?
Yeah.
But like, what are the kinds of things that they're going to need to have prepared? I mean, you mentioned you should be really solid about your logo before you go to trademark it. Any other pieces of advice that people might want to think about if they're starting to think about getting into the legal realm of these things?
So I think it is helpful for anybody to have a strong sense, again, of what is valuable to them, either because it's something they do that nobody else in the market is doing, or it's the way they're going to brand themselves or the way they're going to market themselves. But that business plan question, what is it that's going to be important to you? What are you going to build around? Is the question I'm going to ask if you come to me, because I can't tell you what your IP strategy should be
Sure.
unless I know what your market plan is, unless
Yeah.
I know how you're going to build this business, because then I can tell you, okay, this is worth it. You could do this. You should do X, Y, and Z and build trade dress around it. But if you can't answer that question, like what's going to be valuable to you in the long run, then it's hard for me to tell you what to protect.
Sure. Yeah. Do you tend to find that that's actually really, really tough for beginners and startup brands to kind of answer? I mean, I'll raise my hand and say, I mean, I'm 3.5 years into my business and I think I finally got a grasp on what the hell I'm doing over here. But I did take action to go ahead and start trademarking some things earlier. I guess, how do you kind of make that leap forward at a point before you really feel like you know exactly what your plan is?
So I sort of see two things. I see the company who knows what the thing is, but they don't know how to do it. Right. So
Sure.
I had an apparel brand come to me and they knew they wanted to do like a more quiet luxury thing without logos, but they didn't know
Yeah.
how they were going to protect that.
Okay.
But then I have people come to me and it's scary. It's scary to commit, like, this is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to put the value. It is scary to do that. I actually listened to one of your podcasts where you talked about designers picking a niche
Yeah.
and how much it helped with their brands. And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
The more that you can say, this is what I'm going to build my business around, the more likely it is you're going to get IP that is useful.
Okay. That's super helpful. So yet another
But
reason to define your
yeah,
target customer.
but sometimes I talk to people and they're not ready for that yet. And
Sure.
and it's okay, right? Because you can start, it's not best practice to start out without registering your trademark or without registering some of these things, but you can start out and you can do these things when you could test out 5 different logos if you want to and see what kind of responses you get from your community and then
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm going to go with this one. You can do those things. It's okay. The only thing you can't really do is there is going to be a time when you can no longer file a patent because you will have been on the
Sure.
market too long. But for most of these other types of
Okay.
IP, I tell people, like, we can build it as you go and
Okay.
we can do that.
That's really good. I mean, that's even super good. I'm not building an apparel brand per se, like with products, but that's even super valuable for us to know that like we're probably at a point where we need to give you a call and start talking about some other things. Okay, that's really, really great. I will throw out, and you can kind of dispute me if you want. When we went ahead and started talking to a bunch of other entrepreneurs, when I was thinking about doing some trademarks, the ballpark for a trademark kind of came in around like $2,000 when it came to fees, with like working with the lawyer and all the different fees you're going to have to pay to the federal government to actually register that piece. Does that feel kind of about right if people are just trying to get a ballpark for their budget?
Yeah, it does depend on how many categories of goods you want to file in. So everybody understands you don't just go generally file a trademark. You tell the trademark office, I want this trademark for this class of goods. So the more classes of goods you do, the more expensive. If you're on a
Okay.
budget, I would tell you, do the most important class of goods and then see what you need down the road. But if you do one class of goods, attorney's fees, filing fees, you're probably looking at somewhere between 1,300 and 1,500.
Okay.
But that's to file it. right? You're not
Sure.
talking about office actions that might happen, updates to it that the trademark office, maybe the trademark office doesn't like the specimen you filed, or other things that could cost money down the road. So yeah, I would tell, generally speaking, people should expect it's going to cost around $2,000.
Okay.
Sometimes I would tell people that it's going to cost more. I have some people come to me and they want to get a trademark that we're going to have to fight for.
Okay.
And if you want a trademark you're going to have to fight for, it's going to cost you more than that, right? Because it
Sure.
will cost, I'll have to really push on the office actions, and we'll probably get more than one. And we know it'll be an argument back and forth going in. So if you want one of those trademarks, that's going to be more.
Okay. So it is, I mean, just like so many things, right? Like even with us, we do individual quotes for every single person who comes in. And of course, everybody's situation's a little bit different. But I think when you're just starting out and you're kind of like, am I talking about a couple $100s here, a couple $1,000, like $20,000? What am I looking at? I think it's helpful to know it's somewhere in that range if that's what you're thinking about doing.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you can do it as you go. So I have clients who, filed one initially just generally in apparel. And then as they started to refine what they were doing, we filed in more target categories because they were bringing in revenue at that point. So it's a little bit easier to justify $2,000 when you're bringing in revenue for it. It's very difficult when you're trying to allocate money that's not coming in. That's your own money going out. It's much more difficult. Yes.
100% agreed. Well, great. So how do people get a hold of you? Because if people want to start doing their trademarks and are looking into patents, I think you're obviously an amazing resource for them to come to. It's very rare, I find, to find someone who understands how all of this applies to the fashion world. I think a lot of people can talk about it in the realm of entrepreneurship, but with this knowledge, tell us all about how we find you, how we connect with you, and how we could work with you.
Sure. I do think what I do is unique because I practiced law for over 20 years at big law firms, just like you, working for big companies.
Yeah.
And realized I wanted to work with companies at an earlier stage. So I left and went out on my own. So I had the flexibility to do that. So people can find me in a lot of different places. My website is caiplawyer.com. They can find ways to contact me directly through that. I also do fun TikToks on popular media issues and IP. That's at Tamany Vinson Bentz, just my name on TikTok. Some of that TikTok content makes its way onto LinkedIn when it's what I would say LinkedIn appropriate content from TikTok.
I know what you mean by that. Yeah.
That's both an IP question and a topical question when I do it. And so I am also on LinkedIn under Tamany Vinson Bentz.
Okay, great. And you're also on Instagram too, which is, I know that's where we've been watching all of your stuff as well.
Yeah, I am on Instagram. I am not as fluent on Instagram as I am on TikTok for some reason. Sure. Maybe it's not a surprise to anybody that the lawyer would have an easier time talking than actually putting together an aesthetic post on Canva, but that's the situation I'm in.
Yeah, well, I just talk on Instagram, and whether that's the right thing to do or not, I don't know. Like, that's just what I'm comfortable doing. So like it or not, that's where we're at. So go find Tamany, because if you guys are looking into building your business, setting up the foundations, there are going to be some things that you are going to want to consider, even if it's just a simple logo trademark to start out with. She can help you with that, and then she can help you grow over time too. So thank you so much for being here with me today. And we've learned so much from you. I will be giving you a call here pretty soon, I think, so that we can kind of chat through what some stuff might look like for the business of apparel, because it's ready. We're at a time where I'm ready to start expanding some of that.
That's exciting. Well, thank you for having me, Rachel. I do really appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff too. So please reach out if people have questions.
Amazing. Well, if you guys like this episode, please leave us a review. And if you're watching here on YouTube, put comments down below. We love to hear from our community. Thanks so much for being here with us this week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, thebusinessofapparel.com, where I do weekly trainings through my YouTube video channel, a weekly newsletter, blog articles, and so many more resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand. This podcast is produced by Box 7 Media, who I cannot speak highly enough of. If you're looking to start your own podcast, you can reach out to Jeremy at Box 7 Media on LinkedIn anytime.